At the wedding, I had poured my savings into my daughter's laughter, cut through me sharper than any blade. One careless sentence about my age tossed out like a cruel joke almost crushed my spirit in front of hundreds of guests. I sat there smiling on the outside while my chest burned with humiliation, wondering how the child I had raised could turn my devotion into a stage for ridicule. A single sentence nearly killed me, but strangely, it was not the final blow. I did not yet know that in that very hall among the guests who laughed, someone else had truly heard me, and their voice would change everything. Remember to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because in Grandma Life Stories, you will always find tales of dignity, justice, and healing. My name is Amanda Hayes, and when all of this began, I was 61 years old. I lived in Atlanta in a modest brick apartment that looked over a narrow street where the lamplight spilled through my curtains at night. I believe my story will touch you even just a little bit. A wife, a mother, a grandmother, or anyone else. It was quiet. I had spent 3 decades working as a chief accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. Numbers were my companions, predictable and faithful, never lying to me, never shifting with the wind. That stability kept me grounded when much else in life wavered, but stability, I learned, can vanish in the blink of an eye. It was a Thursday when 2 knocks shattered the illusion that my life still belonged to me. The first was the crisp voice of my manager calling me into his office. He did not meet my eyes as he slid the envelope across the table, a polite speech about restructuring, downsizing budget constraints. I had heard such phrases before, delivered them myself to younger employees in harder times. Now, after 30 years of loyal service, those words were meant for me. I pressed my lips into a thin line, nodded, and left with a box of my belongings balanced on my hip. The second knock came just hours later. A courier in a dark jacket handed me a thick envelope already creased at the edges. Inside was the final divorce decree. Samuel Hayes, my husband of nearly 4 decades, was free. His signature, bold and decisive, stared back at me. Mine followed beneath it, smaller, weary, as if I had signed away not only a marriage, but an entire chapter of my existence. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The walls seemed to lean inward. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence like a mocking voice. In front of me lay 2 envelopes, one from my company, the other from the courthouse. 2 closures, 2 endings delivered on the same day. Outside, Atlanta moved on without me. Cars rushing through intersections, voices carrying laughter, neon signs blinking with life. Inside, I could only feel the weight of absence. I remember tracing the rim of my coffee mug with a finger, noticing the small crack near the handle. I thought of how even the strongest porcelain eventually weakens, how even a life that appears steady can fracture under pressure. For a fleeting moment, I felt as if the world had decided I was done, as though I had reached an invisible expiration date. My age, my years of service, my sacrifices in marriage, none of it seemed to matter anymore. But deep within that heaviness stirred something unfamiliar. It was faint, fragile, but undeniable. Not anger, though part of me had every right to be furious. Not despair, though despair crouched close. It was the whisper of a question: what if this was not the end? What if these 2 closed doors were in truth a passageway to something I had never dared to imagine? I cannot tell you that I leapt to my feet with certainty. I did not. That night, I remained in my chair until dawn, staring at the shadows shifting across the walls. But in the stillness, I realized I was free in a way I had not been since my youth. My future was no longer tethered to Samuel's choices or to a corporation's budget lines. I was a woman emptied of titles and roles, but perhaps because of that, I was finally open to something new. In the days that followed, I walked the streets of Atlanta differently. I noticed the smell of coffee shops, the way people rushed with purpose, the faces of students carrying heavy backpacks, brimming with ambition. I wondered, could I start again? Could I at 61 step into a life I had only dreamed of from the safety of routine? The question lingered in my mind, both terrifying and exhilarating. I did not yet know that the answer would come to me in ways both painful and miraculous, that my daughter's cruel words at her wedding would become the spark I needed, that the humiliation I endured in front of friends, family, and strangers would carve open the space where truth could finally rise, that the CEO, watching quietly, would see in me not failure, but strength. Looking back now, I understand that the day 2 envelopes arrived, one ending my career, the other ending my marriage, was not the day I lost everything. It was the day I was stripped bare, forced to face myself, and handed the chance to rebuild. What came next would challenge every belief I held about age, respect, and worth. But it would also teach me that dreams do not expire. They only wait for us to find the courage to pursue them. And that courage, as I would discover, sometimes comes when you are standing in a crowded hall being mocked by the very child you raised, and realizing that the world's laughter cannot erase who you truly are. I sat at the kitchen table long after the mailman left the divorce settlement check lying flat against the wood. The number was large enough to frighten me, yet it felt like ashes in my hands. 30 years with Samuel Hayes reduced to a neat figure and his final signature. My fingers brushed the ink and I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. It's a wager." The kettle whistled. I didn't move. I had already decided. I cleared the table and spread the documents I had gathered: annual reports, audited statements, risk evaluations. The paper was thick, crisp, and brutal. 30 years as chief accountant had trained my eyes to find flaws, and Sterling Tech's filings sat before me like a puzzle only I could solve. They were young, daring, brilliant in vision, but sloppy in execution. Their burn rate was dangerous. Their debt structure carried traps. Yet behind the noise, I saw potential. I could trace in the numbers what most people ignored: the outline of endurance. I had discovered Sterling Tech months before, buried in a financial journal. Samuel had scoffed. "Amanda, that's a gambler's dream. You're 61. You don't bet on startups, you sit in gardens and drink tea." His words still rang in my head. The same man who now sent me away with a check and a thin apology. I wasn't gambling, I was calculating. The phone vibrated on the counter. A message from Leo, my assistant, younger than my own daughter, but sharp, loyal. "Ready when you are." Should I set the meeting? I typed back quickly. Yes. Sterling Tech. Lucas Sterling himself. No one else. If Samuel thought I would disappear into a quiet retirement, then he never truly knew me. Hours later, Leo arrived. He stepped into my apartment, eyes landing on the fortress of papers spread across the kitchen. "You weren't kidding," he muttered, pulling out a chair. "Sit," I told him, sliding over a stack. "I've annotated every risk exposure, every misstep, but you'll also see what I see, the bones of a company that could outlast its competitors if someone shored up their foundation." Leo flipped through the pages, eyebrows rising. "Amanda, this is more work than any analyst would do in a month." "You're sure about this?" "I'm not here to be sure." I answered, my voice harder than I intended. "I'm here to bet on the part of myself Samuel tried to bury. I spent 3 decades cleaning up the messes of arrogant men who thought numbers were beneath them. If I can't recognize a company worth saving, then what were those 30 years for?" He leaned back, watching me. "You want me to go meet Lucas Sterling on your behalf?" "Yes," I said. "Not as me. Not yet. Let them think you're the investor. I want distance for now, but make it clear our capital comes with scrutiny. They don't get a cent until I see the reform I demand. You'll speak for me, but I'll be the one moving the pieces." Leo nodded, but he hesitated. "And what happens if it goes south?" "Then I lose everything and start over again. But I'd rather burn than live in Samuel's shadow one more day." I slid the check across the table. The paper caught the light like a weapon. "Deposit it. Then draft the transfer. Every cent goes into Sterling Tech. Leo stared at me, then at the check. "Amanda, this is all you have left." "I know," I said, holding his gaze. "That's why I can't waste it." For a moment, silence held between us, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Then Leo took the check. His hand was steady, his eyes sharper than before. "All right. If we're doing this, we're doing it your way." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching Atlanta's skyline glow. The city looked like a cluster of stars close enough to touch, and for the first time in years, I felt something stirring inside me. Not fear, not grief, momentum. When Leo called the next day, his voice carried urgency. He agreed to the meeting. Lucas Sterling himself. He doesn't usually grant direct pitches, but something in the numbers caught his attention. He said, and I quote, "Whoever did this analysis sees deeper than my own team." A thrill ran through me, quick and dangerous. "Did you tell him it was me?" "Of course not," Leo replied. "He thinks it's me, exactly like you asked. But Amanda..." He's intrigued. "I don't think he'll let this stay anonymous for long. Let him wonder," I said. "Mystery buys us leverage." I hung up and pressed my palms to the cool glass. Samuel's words came back. 61-year-old dreamers should stick to gardening. He had mocked my age, dismissed my vision. But Lucas Sterling had read my numbers and stopped to listen. That alone was proof enough. The wager had begun. The following week, Leo left for Sterling Tech's headquarters. I packed the documents neatly into a black folder, aligning the pages, as if precision could will the future into order. Before handing them over, I ran my fingers across the margins one last time. Notes, corrections, arrows. Decades of quiet labor condensed into a battle plan. Remember, I told Leo, don't let them push you around. They'll test you. They'll think you're a proxy for someone weak, someone hiding. Let them think that. And then, when the time comes, I'll step forward. But not a second before. Leo slipped the folder under his arm, his expression grim but loyal. I'll deliver the message. As he walked out the door, I felt the weight shift. My life had narrowed to this wager, and the odds terrified me. But for the first time since Samuel left, I didn't feel discarded. I felt alive. And I whispered to the empty room, "Let them laugh. I'll smile. Then I'll show them." The first year after I placed my wager felt like walking through fire barefoot. I traded my quiet 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta for a cramped space above a laundromat. At night, the hum of machines below mixed with the clatter of keyboards as Leo and I sat shoulder-to-shoulder, papers scattered across every surface. My dining table became a battlefield covered with drafts of contracts, proposals, and endless spreadsheets. I remember one night, clearly 2 in the morning, empty coffee cups stacked like a skyline between us. Leo rubbed his eyes. "Amanda, you realize most people retire at your age, right?" I didn't look up from the ledger. Most people didn't spend 30 years learning how to keep other men from going bankrupt. If I'm still breathing, I'm still building. We worked without glamour. Our furniture was secondhand, the walls peeling, but the ideas we pushed into those nights glowed with the stubborn fire of survival. We needed a name. I wanted something that carried weight, direction, permanence. Orion. I whispered one evening, pointing to the constellation chart I kept taped on the wall. The hunter, the guide in the night sky. Leo tapped the name on the whiteboard, his pen circling it twice. Orion Consulting. People will remember that. So we painted the words on a cheap wooden sign, nailed it crookedly outside the office, and promised ourselves it would one day hang on glass and steel. The first year bled into the second. Every door we knocked on closed quickly once they saw me, an older woman with no venture firm behind her, no flashy marketing, no army of analysts. They wanted youth money, or at least a familiar surname. I had none, but I had numbers, precision, and patience. Our first real client came not from Atlanta's polished boardrooms, but from Savannah, 3 hours away. A small manufacturing company, Wilcox Gears, was gasping for air. Their equipment was outdated, their books a mess, and the bank had already marked them for foreclosure. The owner, Mr. Wilcox, was gray-haired and exhausted, his pride hanging by a thread. He shook my hand across a worn wooden desk. "I don't need sympathy," he said. "I need a miracle. My father built this shop. I won't be the one to bury it." "I don't deal in miracles," I replied, sliding my folder onto his desk. "I deal in math. And if you let me, I'll restructure your debt and streamline your costs. You'll bleed less. You might even breathe again." He studied me for a long moment. "Everyone else gave me deadlines. You gave me a sentence. That's different." For 6 months, Leo and I lived in Savannah 3 days a week. I pored over their invoices, contracts, and balance sheets. I sat with machinists on the factory floor, asked them how long it really took to turn out a gear, and compared their words with the numbers on paper. I argued with creditors, restructured loans, and convinced suppliers to extend terms by showing them projections that even the skeptics couldn't ignore. It was brutal. Long nights ended with me collapsing on motel beds, staring at ceilings stained from leaks. But the tide began to shift. The gears turned again. Orders went out. The bank pulled back from the foreclosure threat. The day Mr. Wilcox signed the recovery contract under the glow of his dusty office lamp, his hands trembled. "You saved us," he whispered. I corrected him. "No, I reminded you how to save yourselves. Orion just gave you the map. That contract was our first victory. A small company in Savannah, yes, but to me it was a declaration Orion Consulting existed. We weren't theory anymore. By the 3rd year, our office above the laundromat had grown unbearable. Files spilled across the floor, interns squeezed between boxes, and the hum of washing machines below felt like a mocking metronome of how little we had advanced. But we had clients now, small ones, steady ones, people who passed my name quietly in conversations that mattered. One evening, Leo walked in carrying takeout dropping cartons of fried rice on the table. "We can't keep running this out of a broom closet," he said. "And who's paying for marble lobbies?" I asked dryly. "Not marble," he replied, grinning, "but maybe glass windows that actually open. And there's a space downtown, small, but it has a view of Peachtree." I stared at him, then at the piles of files around us. My body ached, my hair carried more gray than before, but my resolve had only sharpened. "Schedule a visit," I said finally. 2 months later, Orion Consulting moved into its first official office, a modest suite in a low-rise building, nothing glamorous but ours. The day the new sign went up, I stood on the sidewalk watching the sunlight catch the silver letters. Orion Consulting, clean and straight across glass. Leo clapped my shoulder. "From a laundromat to this." "Not bad, Amanda, not enough," I answered, though my lips curved into the faintest smile. But it was enough for that day. The montage of those 3 years plays in my mind like rapid flashes, coffee-stained reports, endless drives to Savannah, our crooked wooden sign, then the new glass one. My hands ink-stained, my body exhausted, yet my heart refusing to surrender. The closing image still burns into me, signing the Wilcox contract under the yellow desk lamp, the paper trembling under my pen, Leo's tired eyes fixed on mine. That was the birth of Orion, not in fanfare or applause, but in sweat stubbornness and a refusal to vanish quietly. The restaurant in Charleston glowed with candlelight and polished silver, the kind of place where families performed wealth like a stage play. I sat at the end of the long mahogany table, surrounded by Liam Carter's parents, Dulcie and Liam himself, who was clearly basking in the glow of his fiancée and the Carter name. Dulcie's eyes sparkled as she described the venue she had chosen for the wedding. "They'll drape the ballroom with imported linens," she said, her voice high with excitement. "A live orchestra, not just a band, and Liam's cousin knows the head chef, so we're getting a menu no one else in Charleston can touch." Liam leaned back, puffed with pride. "It's expected, of course. The Carters have a reputation. We can't do anything less." His mother nodded approvingly, a faint smile playing on her lips. They were enjoying the sound of their own importance. I tried to join the current of the conversation, waited for a pause, then carefully said, Orion just signed its first manufacturing turnaround in Savannah. It's small, but it means Dulcie cut me off before the words could even land. Mom, she said. Lowering her voice just slightly, tonight is about the wedding. Work can wait. You'll have plenty of time to tell us about that later. Her smile was polished, but the dismissal was sharp enough to sting. The others went right back to laughing about floral arrangements and the guest list, leaving my words floating in silence. I sipped my water, keeping my face neutral, but inside a familiar ache pressed hard against my ribs. To them, my work was a side hobby, something to humor politely. To me, it was my lifeline, the only thing proving I hadn't been erased by divorce age or dismissal. I caught Liam watching me. His smirk was almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of disdain. I pressed my lips together and forced myself to sit straighter. If they thought I would shrink under their indifference, they were wrong. Later that week, Dulcie came by my apartment. She looked flawless as always in a pressed cream dress and heels that clicked against my worn hardwood floors. She sat down at my kitchen table, crossed her legs, and folded her manicured hands on the folder she brought. "Mom," she began, "we need to finalize the budget for the wedding." I raised an eyebrow. "Finalize or inflate?" She laughed lightly, not catching the edge in my tone. "You know how these things are. Liam's parents have already covered most of the venue. His father insisted on handling the orchestra, but, well, people will notice if my side doesn't contribute. I don't want them whispering." I stayed silent, watching her carefully. She went on, her words sliding with practiced ease. "I know after the divorce you don't have much, but you could help at least a little. It's important. And don't worry, I won't tell Liam's family that you're not really working right now." That last sentence landed like a blade. Not really working. I had spent the last 3 years grinding through ledgers, clawing clients out of bankruptcy, and building Orion Consulting from nothing. But in her eyes, it was invisible. For a second, I let the silence hang. Dulcie fidgeted, tapping her nails against the folder. She thought she had cornered me with pity, wrapped in condescension. I stood, walked to the drawer, and pulled out my checkbook. My hand didn't tremble. I wrote the number, cleanly tearing the check with precision. It was a large amount, enough to cover a substantial share of the wedding costs. Money pulled from accounts Dulcie believed were my last reserves. I slid the check across the table. "This is from my savings," I said evenly. "Consider it my contribution." Her eyes widened. "Mom, this is... I didn't think you had this much left." I met her gaze without flinching. "You don't have to think about what I have left. Just take it." She blinked, then nodded quickly, relief replacing hesitation. "Thank you. Really. I'll make sure this counts for something important. And Mom, don't worry. I won't say a word to Liam's family about your situation." Her situation. I forced my mouth into a faint smile, but my chest tightened. The truth pressed hard against my throat. I wasn't broke. I wasn't helpless. The money she thought was my savings was a fraction of what I had rebuilt, but revealing that would destroy the facade I was carefully constructing. For now, silence was my weapon. When Dulcie left, her perfume still lingering in the air, I sat down at the same table and stared at the empty checkbook line. My reflection in the window looked older, yes, but it also looked sharper. I wasn't crushed. I was waiting. That night, I thought about the layers of silence I had endured, being dismissed at the dinner table, reduced in front of my daughter, underestimated by a man who was about to be my son-in-law. They thought I was writing my life out with that check. They thought I was buying their approval, draining myself for their benefit. But I knew something they didn't. Every dismissal, every underestimation was fuel. Orion was growing quietly beneath their noses. And one day, the balance of power at those tables would shift so violently they wouldn't even see it coming. Still, I'm not made of stone. That night, alone in my apartment, I let the sting settle in my chest. Dulcie's words had not been shouted, but they cut more than if she had raised her voice. She didn't see me, not the woman I had become, not the battles I fought daily. To her, I was still just the divorced aging mother who should be grateful to sit quietly while the Carters discussed their legacy. The next morning, I put the vow into action, returning to Orion's office with fire under my ribs. Leo noticed immediately. "You look different," he said as he dropped a stack of files on my desk. "I am different," I replied. "No more explanations. No more waiting for validation. We build. We win. And when the time comes, they'll see." For the first time in weeks, my smile wasn't forced. It was sharp, deliberate. Because I knew family could dismiss me at dinner, strip me of dignity with casual cruelty, but they could not stop what was already in motion. At Orion's office, the glow of laptop screens lit stacks of contracts. Leo scrolled quickly, jaw tight. Another email from Sterling Tech. "They want the cash up front. It's a squeeze." I read Lucas Sterling's words, precise and demanding. The man built his empire by breaking weak hands. He assumed Orion was another faceless fund. He had no idea it was me. I typed back, "Phased restructuring. Immediate injection compromises solvency. Non-negotiable." Leo raised his eyebrows. "Non-negotiable. That's daring. Bold is the only language Sterling speaks," I said. For weeks, we traded volleys, contracts, calls, red lines. Slowly, Lucas's tone shifted. He started guarded, then cautious, until finally there was respect in his concessions. In his last draft, his lawyer admitted Orion's framework reflects strategic foresight. Lucas Sterling, the predator of Savannah's tech scene, had bent. Leo leaned back, grinning. "You've got him." "No," I corrected. "I've got his attention." Respect is rarer than trust. While Orion battled in the boardroom shadows, my family lived in another world, one where I was invisible. At Dulcie's condo dinner, Liam poured bourbon and smirked. "Amanda, big news. Sterling Tech's landing a huge investor. Orion. Sharks. The kind of deal that cements men like me." I smiled faintly. "Is that so?" Of course, these are high-level negotiations, complex financing, EBITDA margins. You know things you wouldn't really follow. But don't worry, I'll explain it simply. The irony nearly made me laugh. The very models he bragged about were mine. I had drafted them that morning, but I stayed silent, letting him enjoy his fantasy. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like a mentor. "This is how you win in business relationships: timing. Soon I'll run divisions. Dulcie will have the life she deserves." Dulcie beamed at him as though his arrogance was gold. I lifted my glass. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out." "Exactly," he said smugly. "And Mom, soon you'll finally see real success." Later, Leo asked me, "Why not tell him, drop it on the table?" "Because timing is power," I replied. "Let him think I'm just the quiet mother-in-law. The reveal will sting sharper." Emails kept landing. Lucas Sterling, once skeptical, now asked Orion's input on strategy itself. He didn't know that the investor shaping his future was the same woman dismissed at her daughter's dinner table. The contrast grew sharper every day. In one world, I was underestimated. In the other, I was obeyed. I carried both truths in silence, waiting for the collision. The night before the signing, I reread Lucas's final line. Orion's framework will define Sterling Tech's next chapter. I closed my laptop slowly, almost reverently. Meanwhile, in the Carter condo, Liam raised his glass in a private toast with Dulcie. Tomorrow's the day. Sterling Tech will announce their deal with Orion. By the end of this, the Carters will be tied to a name that commands Wall Street. I sat across from them, smiling faintly. The two of them thought they were standing on the edge of triumph. They didn't realize the ground beneath them was mine. Dulcie turned to me, her tone dripping with indulgence. "Mom, isn't it exciting Liam's company is finally getting noticed? Just think soon everyone will know he's part of something historic." I nodded once. "Yes, everyone will know." They both laughed, clinking glasses, oblivious to the fact that the historic moment they were celebrating would not elevate Liam, it would expose him. That night, alone again, I whispered into the dark. Tomorrow the worlds touch, and when they did, nothing in my family or Sterling Tech would ever look the same again. The rehearsal dinner glittered under chandeliers at the Riverfront Hotel in Savannah. Silver cutlery clinked champagne glasses caught the dim amber light, and laughter floated like smoke. I kept to my seat near the end of the table. Calm, measured. Then the air shifted. My ex-husband, Samuel Hayes, walked in. He was as polished as ever, navy suit, pressed tie, knotted perfectly, his salt and pepper hair combed back like a politician about to give a speech. His smile was warm, but his eyes searched for someone to wound. He found me. "Well," Samuel said, sliding into a chair far too close, "Amanda Hayes. Still dreaming, are you? You always dreamed big but never had the follow-through." The table chuckled politely. To them, it was harmless banter. To me, it was a knife twisted in public. I held his gaze steady. "I prefer to dream bigger than you could imagine," I answered, tone calm but steel beneath. Dulcie flushed, instantly caught between loyalty and embarrassment. Her eyes darted to Liam, then back to Samuel. "Dad's just teasing Mom," she said quickly, her voice tense. "You know how he jokes." But her eyes betrayed something else, belief that her father's words were true, that I had never been enough. Samuel leaned back, sipping his wine. Of course, nothing wrong with a harmless joke. His smirk said otherwise. Through the rest of dinner, I felt Dulcie's eyes on me, measuring, doubting. Liam, meanwhile, basked in Samuel's approval, eager to be part of the Hayes pedigree. Every story Samuel told seemed designed to underline my supposed failures, the invisible ledger he carried against me. When dessert plates were cleared, Dulcie pulled me aside, her grip firm on my arm. Her voice dropped low. "Mom, listen to me. Tomorrow is important. Please don't bring up work or investments or whatever you've been doing with Leo." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Because she hissed, "I don't want Mr. Sterling or anyone else to think our family is odd. You don't understand how people look at this. If you start talking about business, it'll just sound strange. I don't want people whispering that my mother is some eccentric with half-baked ideas." Her words landed harder than Samuel's. From him, cruelty was expected. From her, it was rejection dressed as care. "Eccentric," I repeated slowly. "That's how you see me." Dulcie's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. "I just don't want to be embarrassed. Okay, tomorrow is about Liam, about the wedding, about our future, not whatever phase you're in. Please don't ruin this for me." I felt the sting but kept my face still. I nodded once sharp. "Fine." She exhaled, relieved, and hugged me quickly. But in her embrace, I felt distance, not closeness. She saw me as fragile, even dangerous to her image. Later that night, back in my small apartment, I sat across from Leo. The glow of spreadsheets illuminated the room. My armor slipped in front of him, the only one who had seen me fight for Orion, seen me win battles no one else knew existed. "I kept quiet tonight," I said flatly. Dulcie asked me not to talk about business. Not a word about Orion, not a word about Sterling Tech. Leo frowned. "Why hide? You've earned the right to speak louder than any of them. You turned Sterling's chaos into order. You've saved companies twice her husband's size." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You don't understand." Dulcie looks at me and only hears her father's voice. If I fail even once, she'll look at me with that same cold certainty he does. That "I told you so" glare. I'd rather stay invisible than see that. Leo shook his head, leaning forward. "You're not invisible. You're the reason any of this is possible. You're the mind behind Orion. And you're afraid of your daughter's disappointment, Amanda. You've stood toe-to-toe with sharks like Lucas Sterling. Why are you still haunted by her opinion?" I swallowed hard. The truth was sharper than I liked to admit. Because she's my daughter. When Samuel mocks me, I can fight back. When strangers doubt me, I can prove them wrong. But when Dulcie looks at me like I'm small, it feels like I've already lost. Leo's eyes softened, but his words were firm. "Then you don't let her see weakness. You let her see what the world is about to see. You let her see Orion." I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until the moment is right." He leaned back, frustrated but respectful. "Just don't hide so long that she forgets who you really are." The night grew quiet. My apartment window framed the river where the rehearsal dinner lights still glimmered in the distance. Somewhere out there, Samuel was celebrating another chance to belittle me. Dulcie was praying I'd keep my mouth shut. Liam was boasting about an investor he didn't understand. And me, I sat with the ghost of my past and the weight of my present. I had walked through humiliation and betrayal, and now I carried the secret of power they couldn't imagine. But the ghost of Samuel's voice lingered, poisoning even silence. You dream big, but never follow through. I closed my laptop, set my jaw, and whispered into the night, "You're wrong." Because this time I would finish what I started. The ballroom was loud with crystal clinks and laughter, but when the doors opened again, silence swept like a sudden draft. Lucas Anderson stepped in, CEO of Sterling Tech. Power dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, shoulders squared presence, undeniable. Even without a word, he commanded the room. Liam straightened, chest puffed. Dulcie nearly glowed, whispering to him, "That's Mr. Anderson. This is Big Liam." I stayed in my seat, spine taut, breath controlled. Of all nights, he had to appear here. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built empires, greeting people with firm nods. When he reached the head table, Liam was already pushing forward, eager to shine. "Mr. Anderson," Liam said, extending his hand with both eagerness and desperation. "I'm Liam Carter. We've actually been in talks with a major consulting group, Orion Consulting. Maybe you've heard of them." Lucas's eyes flickered sharp and amused. "Heard of them?" He gave a low chuckle. "I've been negotiating with them for weeks. Orion is one of the most brilliant partners I've ever had the privilege of dealing with." The words hung heavy in the air. A dozen heads turned toward him, intrigued. Liam's grin widened, assuming credit by association. "Anderson thinks highly of our investor," Liam declared, voice swelling with pride. "That will secure my position." But Lucas wasn't finished. He lifted his glass voice, cutting through the chatter. "Orion Consulting is exceptional. A mind unlike any I've encountered. Precise, visionary. I may never have met them in person, but I've learned to respect them more than most who sit in boardrooms every day." The moment he said it, my fork stilled. My chest tightened, pulse hammering against my ribs. He was talking about me, about my work, my hidden identity. I lowered my gaze, forcing composure. Across the table, Leo's hand curled into a fist under the linen cloth. He glanced at me, jaw clenched, as if willing me not to react. Samuel smirked, oblivious. "Orion, Orion," he mused loudly, swirling his drink. Funny how people worship shadows. No face, no name. Easy to be brilliant when no one knows your failures. Dulcie laughed nervously, then caught herself. She shot me a warning look as if begging me to stay silent. I did. My lips pressed into a thin line. My silence was a shield, fragile, trembling, but necessary. Lucas continued, unaware of the storm he'd stirred at my table. "I look forward to the day I meet Orion face to face. Whoever they are, they've changed the way I see this industry. Genius often hides in unexpected places." A subtle hush followed the weight of his admiration, undeniable. The Carters ate it up like honey. Liam leaned closer to Dulcie, smugness dripping. "See, this is it. With Orion behind us, I'm untouchable." She smiled, proud of him, yet the corner of her mouth twitched with unease. Perhaps she sensed what I carried inside, though she didn't dare acknowledge it. I cut a piece of untouched chicken on my plate, steady hands disguising the turmoil inside me. For years, I had been dismissed as ordinary, irrelevant. Tonight, the most powerful man in the room unknowingly crowned me with the very respect my own family denied me. But I said nothing. Not yet. Leo leaned closer, whisper low enough for only me to hear. "Do you see it now? He called you the sharpest mind he's met. You can't hide forever." "Not here," I muttered, forcing my expression flat. "Not tonight." His eyes burned with restrained conviction, but he stayed silent, honoring my choice. Still, I felt his pulse in the way his knuckles whitened against the tablecloth. The dinner carried on, but I barely heard the laughter or toasts. Every word Lucas had spoken echoed in my mind, a mind unlike any I've encountered. It should have been triumph. Instead, it was torture, because the people who should have known me best were blind. Samuel leaned toward Dulcie again. "Your mother should take notes, dear. Maybe one day she'll understand what success looks like." Dulcie's silence cut deeper than his mockery. She didn't defend me. She never did. I swallowed the sting, my face unmoved. In the theater of appearances, I would not play the fool. My silence was not weakness. It was calculation. I glanced once more at Lucas. He laughed at something Liam said, polite, detached. He had no idea the person he admired sat a few chairs away, invisible, discarded by her own blood. But one day he would know. They all would. For now, I let the secret coil tighter around me, a rope drawn to breaking point. It was not yet time to reveal who held the other end. I lifted my glass, pretending to toast with the others, my eyes catching Leo's for a split second. His clenched fist eased slightly, but his gaze told me everything. When the moment comes, you will not stay silent. The night pressed on, but for me the air was electric, heavy with fate. A single thread connected Lucas's words to my silence, Leo's restraint to my resolve, Samuel's venom to Dulcie's doubt. That thread was pulling tighter, and when it finally snapped, nothing in this family or this empire would remain the same. The church in Savannah was draped in ivory and gold sunlight filtering through stained glass windows that painted the pews in fractured colors. Guests whispered as they filed in pearls and tailored suits glimmering under the high arches. This was Dulcie's day, her dream stage, her flawless backdrop. I stood near the side aisle unnoticed as ushers hurried families to their seats. The flowers, the musicians, the silk-lined programs, all of it had been carefully chosen, funded quietly by me. But no one knew, and I had no intention of revealing it. My only hope was that Dulcie would feel radiant, even if my presence was nothing more than a shadow. She appeared from the bridal room, hair curled into a crown veil pinned like spun glass. She was breathtaking. For one moment, my heart softened. I had raised a daughter who could command a room without speaking. Then she spotted me and her eyes narrowed. She walked closer, her voice low but sharp. "Mother, please," she said, tugging at the pearl bracelet on her wrist. "Don't speak too much today. This is my wedding, not a networking event." I had no intention of speaking, I replied evenly. She gave a quick, bitter laugh. "Good. Because I don't want people thinking my family is eccentric. Just smile. Be graceful. Stay in the background." The words landed heavier than she realized. I forced a nod. "As you wish." Before she could walk away, she leaned in one last time, her whisper colder than the draft running through the nave. 60-year-old dreamers should stick to gardening. Leave business to people who understand it. Her smile returned as she turned toward another guest, as if she hadn't just cut me open with that single line. I froze, but only for a second. My pulse surged, the heat rising behind my eyes. Yet I held my composure. I would not bleed in front of her guests. Across the aisle, Samuel noticed. He smirked knowingly, sipping his champagne. "Still dreaming, Amanda," he called softly, mocking from a distance. "You never learn." Leo appeared at my side, his voice a lifeline. "Ignore him. This day isn't about him or her words." But he saw the way my jaw tightened, the way my shoulders straightened, like steel bars under silk. I was no longer simply enduring, I was calculating. Around us, the atmosphere buzzed. Photographers tested their flashes. The organist rehearsed quiet chords. Bridesmaids adjusted bouquets. Liam strutted down the aisle, shaking hands, boasting loudly. This entire event is a showcase, he bragged to a group of colleagues. When Lucas Anderson sees how connected we are, he'll understand I'm a man worth trusting. I heard him, every syllable dripping with false confidence. If only he knew how fragile his position was, built on the very foundation I had laid. Money he hadn't earned, respect he didn't deserve. Guests murmured about the grandeur. Exquisite, one woman said. They must have spared no expense. Another replied, the Carters certainly know how to make a statement. I stood silent, lips curved in a practiced smile. No one suspected the truth, that it was my savings, my sacrifices, that clothed this church in opulence. A bridesmaid brushed past me, whispering under her breath, "You must be so proud." "I am," I answered simply. She could not know the weight behind those words. Dulcie reappeared briefly, giving instructions, perfecting every detail. "Make sure the ushers know the Andersons are in the front row," she ordered, "and for heaven's sake, keep my mother from speaking out of turn." My hands folded tightly at my waist. It was one thing to be forgotten, another to be shamed before strangers. But still, I did not lash out. Leo leaned closer. "Why do you let her cut you down like this? Because today is hers," I murmured. "If silence gives her peace, I will bear it. But silence isn't forever." His eyes narrowed, sensing the undercurrent. The minutes ticked toward the start. The groom fidgeted near the altar, sweating under the gaze of so many guests. Dulcie paced in her room, her friends fussing over lipstick and lace. Laughter floated out, a stark contrast to the iron tension twisting in my chest. I drifted to the side pew, watching the cathedral fill. The organ swelled briefly, a rehearsal note that made the chandeliers tremble. People hushed, expectant. I looked around at the sea of faces, investors, acquaintances, distant relatives, all here to celebrate. They didn't know the truths buried under the gold trimmings. They didn't know who truly built the stage. And maybe that was for the best. For now. Dulcie stepped into the corridor again, veil lifted slightly as she checked her reflection in the stained glass. She turned away, quickly satisfied with my restraint. She would never know how close the dam was to breaking. The ushers began closing the side doors. Guests rose as the first notes of the processional thundered through the church. My breath slowed, deliberate. I knew this moment wasn't mine. But soon, very soon, the silence I carried would no longer shield them. It would expose them. For now I remained still, the perfect picture of obedience in pearls. But deep inside, the thread of patience frayed one strand closer to snapping. The chandeliers above scattered gold across the ballroom. Glasses clinked, and the crowd settled into their seats. A hush fell, broken only by the faint hum of the string quartet. It was the moment for words, the kind of words that seal a family together. I braced myself, expecting at least a polite nod. After all, it was tradition for the bride to thank her parents. Dulcie rose gracefully, bouquet tucked under one arm, and walked to the microphone at the center of the room. Applause greeted her. She waited, smiling like she belonged to this world of chandeliers and polished marble. And she began, her voice clear, cutting through the hall, want to thank everyone who came to witness this. Family is everything, and I'm grateful for mine. Her gaze skimmed the audience, warm, deliberate, before it found me for half a heartbeat. Then it slid past like I was nothing more than another guest. Especially my father, she continued, voice brighter, who always encouraged me to follow my dreams. The crowd erupted. Glasses lifted, chairs scraped as people stood to clap. I stayed seated. My chest tightened until it felt like iron bands clamped around my ribs. She hadn't stumbled. It wasn't a slip. She had chosen. She had erased me. Next to me, Leo muttered, barely audible, "Unbelievable." But it wasn't over. Dulcie smiled wider, soaking in the applause, then raised her free hand for silence. And before we raise our glasses, she said, her tone sharpening with playful cruelty, "I also want to thank my mother, Amanda." My pulse spiked, but hope flickered. Perhaps she had caught herself. Perhaps she would mend the cut. She did not. At 61, she announced, lips curling instead of enjoying her retirement. Like most people, she decided she could start over. We call it the late life dream. A ripple of laughter spilled across the room. Some chuckled politely, others snorted outright. The spotlight landed on me. I sat frozen, my face calm, my posture unshaken, but my eyes betrayed the storm. Dulcie laughed lightly, pretending it was affectionate. To courage, she added, raising her glass, even if it's unconventional. The hall echoed with clinking crystal cheers, applause, and me, silent, surrounded, bleeding invisibly. Out of the corner of my ear, I caught Liam's low whisper to a colleague at the next table. She thinks she's an entrepreneur. Admirable, really. His voice dripped with mockery disguised as admiration. I swallowed, tasting metal in my throat. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until it trembled. I did not drink. Leo leaned closer, his jaw clenched. You don't have to sit through this. Yes, I said quietly, steady. I do. Because leaving would give them victory. And I hadn't endured 61 years to collapse under a careless laugh. The MC reclaimed the microphone, trying to steer the program forward, but the echo of Dulcie's words lingered heavier than any music. The late-life dream. My own daughter had turned my strength into ridicule. Samuel, seated smugly at a nearby table, smirked openly at me. "Didn't I tell you," he murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "You always chased fantasies. Now even she sees it." His wife chuckled beside him, covering her mouth with a napkin. I exhaled through my nose, slow, controlled. Rage surged, but I funneled it inward, hardening it into resolve. Across the hall, Lucas Anderson sat at the front table, expression unreadable. But I noticed his head tilt the faint crease of his brow. He had caught every word. Dulcie returned to her seat, satisfied, glowing in the approval she had earned at my expense. She didn't look at me again. The evening pressed on, waiters weaving through with trays of champagne laughter, resuming conversations spilling. But underneath it all, I felt the fissure widen, the crack that would no longer be sealed. Words would have been too fragile in that moment. I only breathed, steadying myself, the edges of the ballroom blurring, as I locked onto one truth. This was no longer about recognition. This was survival of dignity. The applause, the laughter, the cruel humor, every bit of it became fuel. I forced myself to raise my glass, not in toast, but in defiance. I lifted it slightly, caught Dulcie's eye across the table, and smiled, not warm, not wounded, cold, calculated. Her expression faltered for just a second, as if she felt the shift. The chandelier light glinted off my glass, casting fractured light across my face. To everyone else, it looked like I was participating, blending, accepting. But inside, a storm gathered. I knew what they saw, a woman past her prime clinging to dreams too late. But what they didn't see was the steel spine, the years of endurance, the fire banked, but not extinguished. They had laughed. They had dismissed me. They had struck the match. And I was about to burn quietly, steadily, until the flames reached them all. The ballroom still buzzed with chatter after Dulcie's toast laughter, drifting like smoke that refused to clear. I steadied my breath, holding my glass just to keep my hands occupied. Then a shadow fell across my table. "Mrs. Carter isn't it?" I looked up. Lucas Anderson, impeccably dressed, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. His presence commanded the room without effort. He smiled politely, extending his hand. "Yes," I said, meeting his grip firmly. "Lucas Anderson, Sterling Tech." His voice was smooth, but there was curiosity layered beneath. "May I say it's a pleasure to finally meet you? Tonight has been interesting." I arched a brow. Interesting is one word for it. He chuckled softly, then leaned in slightly. "Forgive me for asking something unrelated to the wedding. I've been working with a consulting firm recently, Orion Consulting. Extraordinary insights. The strategist behind it has a rare precision. I've been trying to place who they are. Have you ever heard of them?" For a second, the hall dissolved. My heart slowed, then steadied like the calm before a storm. I placed my glass carefully on the table, straightened, and looked him dead in the eye. I haven't just heard of Orion, Mr. Anderson. My voice carried low but unshaken. I founded it. The words landed like a strike. Lucas blinked. His hand jerked slightly, the champagne flute tilting. Liquid trembled at the rim. You. He caught himself lowering his voice, though disbelief colored every syllable. You are Orion, I am, I said simply. For a moment, silence wrapped around us. The ballroom's chatter seemed distant, like muffled static. Then Lucas let out a breath, half disbelieving, half awed. I should have known, he murmured. His gaze sharpened as if reassembling memories. The phrasing, the cadence. In those late-night calls, the emails always signed A. Carter. I thought it was a man. But the way you structured arguments, the precision. He shook his head, almost laughing at himself. I recognize it now. That was you. I allowed a small smile. You underestimated me like most do. He set his glass down on the nearest tray, abandoning it altogether. Mrs. Carter, you don't understand. Your analysis saved us months of trial and error. Entire product lines shifted because of your recommendations. I've quoted your exact sentences in boardrooms. His voice had risen, passion overriding restraint. Heads began to turn. Dulcie glanced over from across the hall, frowning, sensing attention slip from her. I kept my tone measured, calm, deliberate. Then it seems my so-called late-life dream wasn't as foolish as my daughter suggested. Was it Lucas's eyes flicked briefly toward Dulcie, then back to me, hardening? Not foolish at all. Brilliant. Rare. Do they know? No, I replied. And perhaps that's for the best, for now. Leo, seated at my side, leaned forward with a tight smile. You've just confirmed what I've always said. She's not only sharp, she's unmatched. Lucas gave a short laugh, shaking his head as if trying to process the collision of two worlds. I can't believe I didn't see it sooner. The elegance in those forecasts. The way you dismantled market noise with surgical clarity. Amanda, you are Orion Consulting. The name hung between us, heavy, undeniable. I straightened further, feeling the strength in my spine. Yes, Mr. Anderson, I am. The surrounding tables had quieted, sensing something unusual. Dulcie whispered furiously to Liam, who leaned forward, trying to catch fragments of our exchange. Samuel's smirk faded, confusion cutting into his arrogance. Lucas lowered his voice again, but the intensity never dimmed. Do you realize what this means? People have been chasing the identity of Orion for months. Entire industries speculate about the mind behind those reports. Some thought it was an academic think tank. Others swore it was a retired executive. But it was you, here at this table. I inclined my head. People rarely expect much from a 61-year-old woman who dares to start again. That's their mistake, not mine. His laugh was short, incredulous. Mistake, yes, a grave one. Amanda, forgive me, Mrs. Carter. You're not just relevant, you're vital. Sterling Tech owes much of its momentum to you. That drew audible gasps from a few guests who had edged closer, pretending to pass by but clearly listening. Dulcie's cheeks flushed. She stood half-hidden behind Liam, but her eyes darted like a trapped animal's. I stayed still rooted. For years I had hidden behind politeness, silence, endurance. Not tonight. Mr. Anderson, I said, voice firm, steady, I appreciate your words. But I don't need validation. Not from Sterling Tech, not from this crowd. What I need is recognition from my own blood. Yet here we are. Lucas's jaw tightened. Then allow me to say it plainly here now. You have mine. He extended his hand once more, not as a courtesy, but as respect. The weight of his gesture pressed into the room. I took it, meeting his grip with strength. Around us, the silence cracked whispers, rippling like wind through leaves. Glasses lowered, conversation stalled. A shift had taken place. They had mocked me minutes ago. Now they stared as if they'd misread an entire life. Dulcie's voice finally broke through, sharp, almost panicked. Mother, what are you doing? I turned to her slowly, letting every second stretch my gaze steady. I'm answering a question, Dulcie. One you should have asked long ago. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Liam placed a hand on her arm, but even he looked unsettled, his confidence punctured. Lucas cleared his throat, regaining composure. "Forgive me. I didn't intend to turn the spotlight, but sometimes truth refuses to stay hidden." I smiled faintly. It always does. And in that instant under the chandeliers, I felt the balance shift. For the first time in years, I was no longer the quiet widow, the forgotten mother, the subject of ridicule. I was Amanda Carter, founder of Orion Consulting Mind, behind the strategies that powered corporations, and a woman who refused to be erased. The storm had broken, the truth had spoken, and there was no turning back. The orchestra had just struck up a gentle waltz, soft enough to cushion idle chatter. Champagne glasses clinked, waiters slipped between tables, silver trays balanced on gloved hands. From where I sat, the room looked flawless, the kind of polished scene Dulcie had dreamt of since childhood. Then Lucas Anderson stepped forward. Without hesitation, he walked directly to the microphone stand at the center of the ballroom. His stride was deliberate, his shoulders squared. The small talk dissolved as guests turned, sensing something about to happen. He tapped the mic once, and feedback sliced through the air. "Excuse me?" Lucas said, voice amplified, steady but charged. "I need to speak." The laughter died instantly. Glasses lowered, head swiveled. He scanned the crowd, then pointed toward me, not with a hand, but with words sharp as a blade. "Tonight many of you laughed. You mocked a woman who sat here quietly enduring every slight." His voice deepened each syllable, striking like a gavel. "What you failed to realize is that this same woman is not merely a guest. She is the architect of something far greater than anyone in this room imagined." A ripple ran through the crowd. Dulcie's smile froze. Liam tilted forward, confused. Lucas gripped the microphone tighter, his jaw rigid. Amanda Hayes. Yes, the woman right there is not just a mother of the bride. She is the founder of Orion Consulting, the strategist, whose insights reshaped entire industries. But that isn't all. My pulse thudded, but I didn't flinch. I held his gaze as the ballroom leaned in. Lucas drew a breath, voice ringing sharper. "This woman is the CEO of Hayes Capital, a firm managing a portfolio worth tens of millions. And if that's not enough to silence your smirks, hear this: she is the one who acquired Sterling Tech, my company." The room imploded in silence. Not a murmur, not a cough. Just the echo of his declaration ricocheting off marble walls and crystal chandeliers. Then clang. The sharp crash of a fork slipping from someone's hand, striking porcelain. The lone sound in a hall of hundreds. I saw Dulcie's face drain of color, as if someone had pulled the ground from beneath her. Her lips moved soundlessly. Liam's jaw hung open, eyes darting between Lucas and me like a man trapped in a nightmare. Lucas didn't let the silence settle. His voice cut again, relentless. "You cheered her daughter's words, you clapped when she dismissed her own mother as a dreamer. But let me make this plain, without Amanda Hayes, many of you wouldn't even have the jobs you brag about. Without her decisions, companies like mine would have collapsed. She is the reason Sterling Tech stands today." The applause that had thundered for Dulcie minutes earlier felt like a distant memory. Now there was only shock. Guests whispered gasps threading the air. Leo leaned closer to me, whispering so only I could hear, "They can't laugh now." I stayed still, my chest rising steady. This moment was not mine to chase, it had arrived crashing into the open because truth had demanded it. Dulcie stumbled toward the front, her heels clicking like hammers. "Mr. Anderson." "This is inappropriate, inappropriate," Lucas snapped, turning on her with the authority of a man who had built empires. "No, Miss Carter. What's inappropriate is erasing a woman who built more with her mind than most men in this room build in their lifetimes." The words landed heavier than the chandeliers overhead. Dulcie froze, caught in the spotlight she could not control. I met her eyes at last. She searched my face, desperate for denial, for some explanation that would let her keep her illusion intact. I gave her none. Lucas pressed on. You wanted a perfect wedding, Miss Carter, but the perfection you crave was bankrolled by the woman you've ridiculed. Without her, this event wouldn't shine half as bright. Without her, you'd be standing in a rented hall with paper napkins. Remember that? A murmur rolled through the guests, outrage mixing with awe. Some clapped instinctively, others sat paralyzed. The weight of revelation pressed on every corner of the room. Liam finally found his voice, though shaky. This can't be real. Amanda. I rose to my feet. My voice unamplified, still cut through the stunned quiet. It is real, Liam. Every bit of it. I built Orion. I lead Hayes Capital. I acquired Sterling Tech. And I sat here tonight silent while my own daughter reduced me to a punchline. The hall erupted in murmurs. A few people actually stood, craning for a clearer view. The light from the chandeliers caught the edges of my dress, but it was my words that illuminated the room. Lucas's tone softened, but it carried no less force. For months, I worked with Orion, never knowing the mind behind it. To learn it was you, Amanda, only confirms what I already suspected. Genius often hides in plain sight, and shame on anyone who can't see it until it's spelled out. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling a wave that filled the hall. Some clapped to mask discomfort, others because conviction had struck them. Dulcie's hands trembled at her sides. Mother, why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked, I said simply. The applause grew louder. The truth had detonated and nothing could be stitched back together. I stood firm, letting the moment settle, every eye fixed on me now. For decades, I had lived behind others' shadows, first as a wife, then as a widow, then as the mother who paid but was never acknowledged. Tonight, that shadow burned away. Lucas placed the microphone back on its stand, his expression taut but respectful. Amanda Hayes deserves recognition. More than that, she deserves respect. And I will not stand by while she is mocked. The last clap died down, leaving only the echo of his words. I looked across the room at Dulcie, pale and shaken, at Liam, rattled, at Samuel, suddenly small, at strangers now staring with new eyes. My voice steadied one final time. You wanted to know who I am, I said. Now you do. The room held its breath, and in that suspended silence I knew nothing would ever be the same. Dulcie's sob broke the silence. Her carefully arranged mascara bled into dark streaks as she stumbled toward me, voice trembling. Mother, why didn't you tell me? Every head turned, waiting for me to soften. I didn't. My spine stayed straight. My tone calm, but every word carved deep. Because you wanted me silent. You needed a flawless wedding, and I let you have it, even if it shattered me. Her lips quivered. No, You rehearsed every detail I cut, in my voice rising. The flowers, the speeches, the guest list. But not once did you ask who I really was. You didn't want the truth. You wanted a prop. Her tears fell harder. I didn't mean you meant exactly what you said tonight, I answered, unwavering, that I was chasing an old woman's dream, that my life was something to laugh at. Do you think I didn't hear it? The crowd held its breath. Liam stepped forward, then trying to fill the void, his voice coated with false reason. If I had known you were this successful, Mrs. Hayes, I would have treated you differently. The room gasped, whispers flaring at his slip. His own arrogance betrayed him. I didn't hesitate. My words cut clean. And that is precisely why you will never understand me. Real respect is not conditional. If it depends on a bank account, it is nothing but greed dressed as manners. Liam flushed his jaw, tightening, but he had no reply. I turned back to Dulcie. Her sobs grew weaker, no longer, the tears of prideful anger but of recognition. Her voice cracked. I wanted one perfect day. Why couldn't you wait until after I met her eyes without blinking? Because I have waited 61 years. Waited through your father's shadow, through widowhood, through being overlooked in my own home. I will not wait another hour for permission to exist. Her shoulders shook. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. I thought you were embarrassing me. The words pierced, but I didn't let them wound me. I steadied my voice. No, Dulcie, you embarrassed yourself by being ashamed of me. You thought success had to wear a younger face or a man's name or anything but mine. Her hands trembled against her dress, crumpling the silk. She collapsed into the nearest chair, covering her face. The hall was silent except for her muffled sobs. I felt every eye drilling into me, testing whether I would gloat, whether I would strike again. But I kept my tone steady, sharp, undeniable. You wanted perfection, Dulcie, but perfection without truth is just a stage set. Tonight the curtain fell. Across the room a murmur rose, guests beginning to shift their expressions, a mix of shame and awe. Some nodded, others lowered their eyes, embarrassed at their earlier laughter. I stood tall. I never needed applause. I never asked to be worshipped. All I ever wanted was honesty and the courage from my own daughter to see me as I am. Her hands lowered slightly, her eyes swollen raw. I see you now, she whispered. It was not triumph. It was agony, the kind that tears through illusions. But it was real. Liam tried one last time, his voice stiff, brittle. Well, appearances matter. Maybe if you had just told us earlier, enough. I snapped my voice, slicing through his excuse. A man who measures worth only in appearances has no place to speak here. He fell silent, humiliated in front of hundreds. I straightened, scanning the hall. Do you all hear it? This is what happens when truth is buried. Families fracture, respect rots. Tonight the truth is out and it will not be buried again. Silence, then scattered applause, genuine this time. Not forced, not polite. It swelled slowly, carrying weight. I didn't smile. My expression held steady, my words. Final. I am Amanda Hayes. Not a footnote, not a prop, not a ghost at her own daughter's wedding. I am who I have always been, only now you cannot look away. Dulcie lifted her head, eyes wet, her face pale. She mouthed, barely audible, I'm sorry. I gave her no embrace, no absolution. That was not what this night was for. This was not reconciliation. It was revelation. The hall was still vibrating with the echo of my words. Dulcie's tears hadn't dried, Liam's pride hadn't recovered, and yet all eyes clung to me, waiting for what I would do next. I could feel the air begging for more spectacle, for me to burn them further, humiliate them. But that was never my victory to take. I reached for my glass. The stem was cool, the liquid inside still untouched. My fingers didn't tremble. I lifted it slowly, letting the silence deepen until it carried weight. I will not turn this wedding into a battleground, I said, my voice steady, low enough to draw everyone closer. Tonight is not about me. It is about them, my daughter and her husband. The crowd shifted, whispers fading into stillness. I raised the glass higher. So let us toast, not in bitterness, not in shame, but in truth. Because truth is the only soil in which love can survive. A murmur rippled across the hall. My chest tightened, but my tone held strong. Here is to Dulcie and Liam. May they learn what it means to respect each other, even when the spotlight dims. And may they learn that dreams don't expire, people do when they stop believing. The last sentence struck like a hammer. The chandeliers above seemed to freeze, the clink of cutlery died. No cough, no shuffle, no polite distraction, just silence so thick it pinned every soul to their seat. I scanned the room. Faces that minutes earlier mocked me now reflected something else, shame on some, awe on others, a dawning recognition on many. The camera lights from the hired videographers panned across, capturing every expression, Liam pale and stiff, Dulcie wrecked in mascara streaks, Lucas watching me with eyes sharp as steel, and guests staring as if they had just seen an entire world turned inside out. For a second, I felt the temptation to lower my glass and retreat. But no. I steadied it higher. This is not a speech of vengeance, I continued. I have no need to avenge myself. The truth already did what vengeance never could. It revealed character, and it revealed mine. Someone in the back clapped tentative. Another joined. Then the sound grew real, not staged, not forced. Applause that rolled forward cautious but undeniable. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I simply nodded, lowering the glass with dignity, sipping once letting the wine sting against my tongue like a seal pressed to wax. Dulcie's sobbing slowed. She stared at me as though seeing a stranger who had been living in her own house. Liam avoided my eyes altogether. Jaw locked his hand, gripping his fork so tightly his knuckles blanched. I set my glass down. My words had been spoken, my stance made clear. Nothing more was needed. The applause softened, leaving a charged hush behind. A hush that didn't beg for more, it demanded reflection. I looked once more at my daughter. "This is your day," I said, quieter now, but still heard. "Carry it well." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She only nodded faintly, broken, perhaps changed. And with that, I stepped back, giving the stage to the very people who once thought they could erase me. The truth was no longer mine alone. It had been poured into their glasses, swallowed in silence, tasted by every guest in the room. No one could spit it out. The wedding reception resumed, but it would never be the same. The laughter that followed carried edges of guilt. The clinking of glasses sounded heavier, and every cheer was shadowed by what they had witnessed. But I didn't need their redemption. I had already claimed my own. The reception dissolved into fragments of chatter and muted laughter, but the storm had already passed. I slipped into the dressing room, the silence heavier than the applause I'd just left behind. Moments later, Dulcie pushed through the door, her eyes swollen, makeup streaked. She closed it behind her, the sound of the latch final, as though sealing us into a truth we could no longer avoid. She didn't posture anymore. She didn't wear the armor of the perfect bride. She simply stood there trembling before she collapsed into a chair. Tears poured as if every defense she'd built cracked at once. "Mom," her voice broke jagged as glass. "I never understood you. Not once. I thought you were just small, unimportant. I thought you lived in shadows because you had nothing else. And tonight I realized it wasn't you who was small, it was me." I stood still, letting her words fall. There was no satisfaction in watching her break. Only the ache of years wasted between us. I sat across from her, folding my hands carefully in my lap. "I didn't hide the truth to humiliate you," I said, my tone firm but not cruel. "I hid it because I feared adding one more disappointment to your life. I was terrified that if you saw me for who I truly was, you'd reject me again. But I was wrong. I should have trusted the love between us, not my fear of losing it." She lifted her face, streaked with tears. "And instead, I made you feel like an intruder at my own wedding. I chose appearances over you." I leaned forward. "You wanted a perfect wedding, Dulcie. You thought perfection meant silence. And I gave you that silence even when it nearly destroyed me. But silence is not love. Love tells the truth even when it hurts." Her shoulders shook. She pressed her palms to her face, and for the first time since the day began, she let herself be the daughter who once needed me, not the bride who wanted to erase me. I reached across and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. We sat there, mother and daughter, neither victorious, neither defeated. Just two women stripped of pretense, forced to confront the truth neither of us had wanted to say. Through the window, the late sun stretched across the horizon, its glow slicing into the room like a blade that illuminated rather than cut. I turned my eyes to it, letting the warmth remind me that storms pass and dawn always insists on returning. Dulcie followed my gaze. "Is there a way back?" she whispered. "There's always a way back," I said, "but it requires walking toward each other, not away." For a long moment, we simply breathed in that quiet, no words filling it, only the fragile sound of reconciliation in progress. Outside, I caught sight of Lucas and Leo in the courtyard. Lucas's stance was steady, a man who had seen power stripped to its core and respected what remained. Leo met his eyes with a nod that spoke of loyalty, of promises kept, and battles yet to come. The sight anchored me. Whatever came next, I was no longer invisible. The truth had been spoken aloud, and it could not be undone. I turned back to Dulcie. This day will not be remembered for what I was accused of. It will be remembered for what I refused to become. Bitter, vengeful, small. That is the gift I will give you tonight, one chance to see that truth doesn't need a stage, but it should never be buried. Her hand tightened on mine, weak but sincere. I don't deserve you, she whispered. It isn't about deserving, I said, steady as steel. It's about deciding who we will be from this moment forward. The sun dipped lower and light pooled across the carpet, softening the edges of the room. I rose, pulling her gently with me. We stood by the window together, letting the light wash over our faces. No words could repair the years behind us, but the silence now was no longer a prison. It was a beginning. My voice, calm and final, carried the truth I wanted the world to remember. Truth doesn't need spectacle, but it should never be buried. And sometimes it rises at the very moment you least expect, just to remind us that dreams don't age. People do when they stop believing. We stood there side by side, the storm behind us, the future not yet written, but possible.